Good morning, everyone. Today's meditation comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm reading through the chronological Bible in a year. This scheme is readily available on the net, but it basically follows the Bible as best as we can understand in chronological order. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the Apostle Paul is warning the Christian church using examples, illustrations from the Old Testament. One of the reasons why I do the Bible in a year is because it keeps the Old Testament stories before me. Now, not every Old Testament story has an application to the Christian church, but many of them do. In fact, Paul opens up in chapter 10 saying, I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud as they passed through the sea. And he goes on and talks about the powerful example of how God was very present in the life of Israel, and yet even when he was so evidently with them, they chose revelry and they chose apostasy in the desert. And so Paul says, now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. So there Paul is taking a negative Old Testament example and says, look, this example reminds us, church, that there are consequences for evil actions, even on the part of God's people. And then in verse 11, the apostle writes, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So again, the Apostle Paul is underscoring the relevance of the Old Testament to the New Testament church, because there are warnings here that are embedded in the Old Testament for our own learning and for our own good, because temptations are common to people and have been right throughout history. And so we see some of these old temptations and we feel their pull in our own lives. And the warnings in the Old Testament show us that, hey, let's think about this because there are consequences for these actions. So Paul finishes off this little section. I'm going to start reading from verse 12. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to mankind. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can endure it. And so Paul is encouraging us, saying, look, there are negative consequences for disobedient actions, but God knows our heart and he gives us opportunity to escape the hard testing when it comes. And so today, if you're hard tested, whether it's to do with, worshiping the wrong things or sexual immorality, which comes up in this chapter, it could be any temptation, God's saying, look for the way of escape because he's provided it for us, and keep on standing firm. God bless you today. Hey, see ya.